Good afternoon. Welcome to our program. We organize this program in collaboration with Istanbul Policy Center. Today we will talk about nationalisms before and after coronavirus pandemic, specifically a comparison between Russian and Turkish nationalisms and so on. Today we have two guests. One of them is from Berlin, Michael Thumann. Michael Thumann is diplomatic correspondent of German newspaper Die Zeit and 2019 and 20 Mercator Istanbul Policy Center Senior Fellow. And the second guest is Evren Balta. She is a senior scholar at Istanbul Policy Center and associated professor of international relations. Welcome to our program.
Hello. His nationalist tendencies, and it has created some patterns, new patterns with regard to the nationalism, such as, we have been witnessing economic nationalism. You can see it in Trump's policies, isolationism, and you can see it in the UK, you can see it in Poland, in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia. But now the trend toward economic nationalism is basically accelerated. It has been reinforced by it was there a little bit, it wasn't there to help the nations to get over this crisis. This was even a fact within the EU institution and union that we have been discussing as a primary example of internationalization. The bonds within the EU is much more as we compare it to the other international institutions or regional organizations and this and that. So I would say that what coronavirus, the pandemic, had did is basically reinforce this trend and reinforce the idea of self-sufficiency, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Michael Thumann.
By choice, in contrast to that, is a policy where nationalism just is a function. It is not a full-style ideology. You can adopt it and you can drop it also at a certain time. If it doesn't meet your needs anymore. And this is a new trend which we have seen with various leaders in Central and Eastern Europe, but also with Donald Trump, the US president.
Mm-hmm.
One, obviously, with the usual methods Russia applies. But to sum it up, it is amazing how badly nationalists by choice did in this crisis.
Mm-hmm. Evren Balta, what do you think about this nationalism by choice? Can you find this term functional, or do you agree with Michael Thumann, especially in terms of comparing Russia and Turkey?
Mm-hmm. Well, what basically Michael is referring, we have been going through a lot of crises lately in the sense that the society is changing so rapidly, and we do not have institutions really that basically rework all these tensions within the society. I certainly agree that there is a kind of instrumentalization going on in all these countries by the nationalist political elites, but also we can see that that instrumentalization is basically has an echo. It is there already in the society. Some of the societies, especially Turkey and Russia, are already very nationalist in the sense that anti-Western sentiments are of the forces within Russia, including history, including different types of ethnicities, this and that. But when you look at Turkey, the boundaries that the incumbents and the government basically draws is mostly both external, like Turkey versus the vast Turkey and the outsiders, but also internal to the society. What I mean by when I say internal to the society, the Turkish political elite has been drawing a lot of boundaries for the 20th century as well. For example, Kemalism versus conservative forces, secularists versus Islamism. So they are more exclusionary in the sense that they have a lot of internal boundaries as well. So in the case of Turkey, nationalism is not really a more unifying force, but a polarizing force, because it really attaches itself with the populist ideology of the AKP. But in terms of Russia, when you look at Putin's discourse, you see a lot of, like he basically embraces the Stalin, the Soviet past, including Stalin. He embraces the Russian Empire. He embraces lots of different ethnicities and this and that. So I do see, I don't know whether Michael agrees with me, but I do see a little bit more of a, how to say, an external boundary and a more homogenizing force. I mean, nationalism being a more homogenizing force in Russia.
And can I add there one thing, which is I think very telling about both countries, because in fact, yes, Evren, Turkey has these rivaling nationalisms competing with each other from the right, which in Russia is more subdued, where you have basically two big streams, which is ethnic Russian nationalism and then the imperialist nationalism. And the interesting thing about Putin, and this is also what nationalism by choice is about, is that Putin wouldn't decide for one direction, but he actually chooses from this menu, and he would actually go for and plays around with different. Sometimes he goes for ethnic nationalism, sometimes he emphasizes the more imperialist aspect of it. And thus, in fact, he had managed for quite some time to unify the country in stronger ways than President Erdogan could. But on the other hand, it is now interesting to see how he doesn't, how he's not able to do so anymore. And there's the pandemic and maybe also an expiry date of this kind of policy, which we see in Russia.
We couldn't hear your last words. Can you please say again the last you say? I will cut after the recording.
Okay. I just sum up. So I think what we see here is, on the one hand, the rivaling nationalisms in Turkey, where you have nationalism from the right and from the left in a strong competition. In many nationalisms, whereas in Russia you would have basically two big streams, one of which is imperialist and the other is more ethnic oriented. The interesting thing about Putin and how he managed to unify the country was that he plays around with both. He sometimes emphasizes ethnic aspects, specifically with regard to Crimea, sometimes more the imperialist aspects, including non-Russian ethnicities as well in Russia as a multi-ethnic country and empire. So, and this is what I think how he managed to unify the country in stronger ways than Erdogan did in the past, who polarized much more. But I think it is very interesting to see how the way Putin managed to unify the country ceases to work now. It doesn't work that well as it did back in 2014. And we can see it also in the various protests in Russia, the uneasiness of the population with this cause. His brand of nationalism by choice has lost its appeal.
Michael Thumann, you mentioned in policy brief an expiry date for nationalism. When is it actually, or why comes an expiry date for nationalisms?
Yeah, this is exactly what I alluded to just a second ago, that in fact we see with Putin it doesn't work that well anymore. I wouldn't say he has stopped this course. He hasn't dropped nationalism by choice. He still tries it, especially with this conservative brand of how to resurrect Russia as a conservative power in the world, and adhering to special moral standards. But the appeal in the broader population is waning. I think also we can see in certain Central Eastern European countries that the appeal is not as strong anymore, and that we see how, for example, in various capitals and bigger countries in Central and Eastern Europe, in 2019 already incumbent conservative and nationalist mayors lost their positions. The same, by the way, happened in Turkey. We saw it in Turkey. So there are counter movements growing. And I think it will be a long battle. It's a long drawn out battle. But we see tendencies all over growing. And the pandemic basically has put, for the time being, a freeze by ways of closing borders and erecting protectionist fences. But I think that we are right in the middle of the battle.
Mm-hmm. Evren Balta, do you also see an expiry date for nationalism, especially considering the last referendum in Russia?
Well, there are too many aspects to your question that I have to mention. I mean, if the question is about, is there an expiry date for nationalism? Well, everything has an expiration date, but this could be a long expiration, right? As a force, nationalism has been really shaping the global politics in the last 2-3 centuries. So it may keep shaping it. So it's very hard to guess whether nationalism, either in its instrumental form or in its discursive form or societal form, I would suspect that. I mean, I would suggest that it will be alive for a long time, and it will be one of the main tenets of the global political debate for years to come. But when we talk about the expiration dates or the expiry date of the instrumentalizing nationalist leaders, there are a lot of I have to say secular forces that are challenging and a lot of problems that are challenging their rule. Some of them Michael already mentioned. There is a lot of popular discontent coming from the bottom up of the society, including issues of race, gender, value gaps, economic crisis, pandemic, and for none of these issues really do nationalists have a long-lasting solution. But on the other hand, who has the solution? I mean, that's the problem. So the instrumentalist nationalists do not have a proper solution for this major crisis that we're facing now. But the oppositional forces, rather than, like protesting what's going on or asking for justice and this and that, I mean, what we have been witnessing is that really a sort of absence of an organized opposition with a story or with an agenda to challenge this instrumentalist leaders. This is both true for Turkey and for Russia as well. And as you mentioned in your question, the latest Russian referendum, and every one of us expecting that at least the turnout rate would be low. And it wasn't low as we were expecting. It was around, if I'm not mistaken, 60%, which is quite high in Russian standards. And also the approval rate, although again, there's a lot of corruption claims and a lot of, problems with the voting mechanisms and the procedures and the counting of the vote, a lot of allegations around this, the mechanisms and the electoral process with regard to the referendum. But still, you have 80% approval rates, which a bit shocked me, actually. I mean, I was expecting that it would get approved it would be similar to what's happening in Turkey, like 51%, 52%. But given what we discussed with Thumann, with Michael, about, Putin becomes more of a unifying leader when it comes to referendums and this and that, as opposed to the AKP and Erdogan, because of its more inclusive nature. You see this more the approval rates seem to be higher than it's in Turkey. And a lot of changes have been made to the Russian constitution. We can talk about that if you want, but it really basically one of the changes that the media has really underlined is that made possible for Putin to be a president for two more 6-year, two consecutive terms, and for 6 years to be a president. Whether he'll take the chance or not is another debate still going on. Some say that he won't be running for president. Some say yes, he will run for president. But still, constitutionally now he has the right for 12 more years to act as a president.
Mm-hmm. Michael Thumann, today we mostly talk about Russian and Turkish nationalisms, but I don't want to miss this chance out because a German person is sitting here, and you are a German person, you work and live in Germany. How do you see and evaluate German nationalism now?
We had a huge problem with right-wing nationalist terrorism in Germany in the past year and in the beginning of this year. And I think this period is still on, although the pandemic has changed things, and German right-wing groups and nationalists are struggling at this point in time. They are also being excluded from all kinds of social media, and so there's a lot of scrutiny at the moment to fight these groups, and they are clearly on the defensive. Also, the German Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, is on the defensive. They are below 10% now in the polls. But I would like to stress that I think these are all temporary issues. I think they might be back. It is clearly the pandemic is not their topic. It is not something where they can fight against an external or whatever enemy. It is the invisible enemy. They don't know how to fight. And this is why I think they are in trouble. But I think we'll have to be vigilant, because these guys will be back if there's another crisis to come, and I'm sure they will, as we will see economic problems all over Europe, all over the world. Germany has been doing so far quite relatively fine in this crisis. We have enormous spending programs by the government. So the population doesn't feel it yet, but I think there might be other times, and that's another chance for right-wing extremism.
Mm-hmm. The second question for you, Mr. Thumann. Which nationalist or populist leader became stronger in the period of coronavirus pandemic? What do you think?
There was, sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you repeat the question?
Which nationalist or populist stronger or weaker during the coronavirus period?
I'm still sorry. I haven't there. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Now, can you hear me?
The last sentence was
okay, that is,
audible again.
Okay. The leaders. Which leaders became more stronger after or during coronavirus?
I think that as I mentioned before, leaders, nationalist leaders, some nationalist leaders have been clearly weakened. And I mean, the jury is still on for Donald Trump on November 3, obviously. But I think for the first time in his term in office, there is a substantiated hope that he might not win the election. We will see then whether he really leaves office and under which terms he is leaving. But so things look clearly bad for him. There are other leaders who try to ignore or deny the crisis, like the Brazilian leader Bolsonaro. And again, I'd like to stress Putin's start into the crisis, which was really bad. He looked terribly lost when he appeared in a protection suit, in yellow protection suit in a hospital, and was clearly seeking for protection from this crisis for his own power in the beginning of the crisis. I think best in the crisis did those leaders who acknowledged that there is a huge challenge for the whole world, who maybe not were the first to react, but when they understood, reacted quickly and consulted with virologists, with doctors and specialists. So what we see here is also a kind of return of expertise for the first time since many years. I would not go as far as saying this has convinced everybody and that we are through with this crisis of expertise and that people prefer conspiracy theories over expertise and facts. It's not over yet, but I think for the first time we see that listening to experts has paid off, and I hope this will, and leaders who did so, and of course European leaders, and including the German Chancellor are among those. It has paid off for them. If you look at the polls, some democracies today look much more stable and intact than they did before the crisis.
Okay, because of the problem in internet connection, we had to change our studio and we have to continue in this studio. Sorry for disturbance. I would like to ask my last questions. Let's begin with Mr. Thumann. I asked the role of the leaders and the positions of the leaders all over the world. I mean, which nationalist leaders became more stronger and which ones became more weaker after the pandemic? I don't know if it's true saying after, but or during pandemic.
Well, I think we see that nationalist leaders in general suffered from this crisis. We see it specifically with US President Trump, who did very badly because he could not ignore this virus. He could not manipulate the facts as he did with many other facts before, and it came back to haunt him. And I think in similar ways, we see that leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil or Boris Johnson in Britain, they also, or Vladimir Putin for that matter in his first months, they all did very badly. I think this is the first crisis since many years to hit populism instead of help populists. And it's the first crisis they cannot benefit from. And I also see a kind of return of the expertise. I wouldn't suggest that this is the final end of the conspiracy age. I think we will see that in the future as well. But we see leaders who have listened to experts and who have benefited from them, and it helped them to steer their countries in a better way. And we also see, which is a positive note, some democracies reinforced, also some federal models reinforced, because they could react appropriately to the crisis. That doesn't mean that the age of nationalism is over or that the virus kills the nationalists, because, and here I come back to Putin, of course, these leaders seek their ways out, and Putin has chosen the referendum to prolong and extend his rule, possibly until 2036. And I think other leaders will also try to stick to power with more repression and less freedom of speech. So we will see this struggle going on.
Thank you very much. And the same question is also for you, Evren Balta. What do you think about the performances of the nationalist leaders during the pandemic?
I think Michael was correct. This is one of the major crises that the populism, and a major grave crisis, it's in fact a disaster that the populist leaders has faced since many years, maybe after 2008 financial crisis, which was another major crisis. But then populism was not as strong as it is now. So in theory, we basically argue that the populist leaders benefit from crisis because the idea, or the nationalist leaders benefit from crisis because the way that they hold on to power is basically exaggerating the claim of the crisis or the situation of the crisis, and they offer themselves as the only solution to the crisis. But in this case, since this is a grave and a real crisis, I mean, and it is basically about the survival we basically experience whether we are going to survive or not. We all got isolated in our homes, our lifestyles changed, everything changed. And many of the leaders, specifically nationalist, authoritarian, populist leaders, did not have many solutions. And yes, Bolsonaro, Trump, they all did very badly facing this crisis. And I would say not the basic criteria here, as Michael is arguing, is not any leader is a populist or nationalist. That's true that the populist leaders are more prone to conspiracy theories, and the corona crisis really provided them a perfect venue to use it as or to say that this is basically a conspiracy, right? It's not really happening, but it was really happening. So I would say that the major benchmark is whether you listen to the expertise, whether you are aware as a leader to the situation, to the gravity of the situation that your society is facing. So some of the nationalist leaders and populist leaders, in fact, were aware of this. Right? And they basically acted by using scientific committees, by consulting to the experts. And some of them, as in the case of Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, and Trump, basically undermined the gravity of the crisis. So that initial undermining of the crisis really made them look, really didn't help them to benefit, to use this crisis in their own benefit, in other words. Initially, what we have seen is the rally around the flag effect, which is if your nation is facing a crisis, then the incumbent political actors, the actors in the government, basically benefit from those crises. But what we have been experiencing more lately is that decline in the approval rates of specifically President Trump. And I think it's going to continue in the near future. This is also related to one structural fact and a long-term fact. The pandemic is an international global problem, and there cannot be no conspiratorial, nationalist, isolationist solutions, long-term solutions to such crisis. You have to cooperate. You have to really internationalize the situation, work with the institutions, in order to effectively really counter the adverse effects or negative effects of the pandemic. And many of the national leaders are really not open to that. If you go back to the initial debate that we had about the expiry date of nationalism, only maybe because of this structural principle that this crisis is and requires an international response, that may reinforce the problems that the nationalists are facing right now in responding to the major crisis, not just the corona, but the social and economic crisis that we are facing now.
Mm-hmm. Evren Balta and Michael Thumann, thank you very much for your attendance. And dear audience, thank you very much for watching. See you next time.